show where I try to educate real stories. Thank you for watching Truth and Justice with Vivian King. I'm excited tonight because I have a part 2 show for Mr. Christopher Flakus. He's been on the show before, and I ran into him and his dad at the airport, and he was nice enough to say that he would be our final show for December of 2018. So welcome back, Christopher.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Yes. So Christopher, talk to me tonight about what's been going on in your life. But you know our format. We start off with how you got in trouble, the type of life you had growing up, and what led you to, going to jail. And then, of course, after that, we'll talk about how you overcame.
Okay, absolutely.
So tell me your story.
Well, I am someone who got involved with drugs and alcohol pretty young. As I seem to see that's kind of the standard. I don't meet many people who got into it late in life. There are those cases, but it was around 13, 14 I started drinking. At the time I was living in Mexico City. My mother's from Mexico and my father was an American journalist. So that was a big factor. In Mexico, you could get served alcohol. You didn't need to, you weren't going to get carded. It was easy to buy alcohol, and drugs were cheap and readily available. So it just seemed like a normal part of life. Everyone I knew used drugs and drank, and none of them had problems. I'd never met a real addict at that point, and my world was so saturated with drugs and alcohol that I, thought of addicts as something from movies, or the guy under the bridge, with a paper sign. And I thought that, will never be me. When I moved to Texas, it was my senior year in high school, it had been 2003, I quickly found a group of friends that matched what I was used to. Only the drugs had changed. In Mexico City, it was, marijuana, maybe cocaine at its worst. And here in Texas, I found some really strong drugs, and it was
like what?
Heroin, methamphetamine.
Did you try those things?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it was 19 when I first tried heroin. I was in my first year at college, doing well in life, making good grades, had a great job doing security at the library at St. Thomas University, and that's kind of where my double life began. During the day I was this college student, dedicated to my studies, bookish, seemingly intelligent, and at night I was, at the time I wasn't injecting heroin, I was just smoking it, and that's sort of how the increments begin. You make these rules for yourself. Well, I'll smoke it, but I'll never shoot it. Or, I'll shoot it, but only on weekdays. I mean, you make all these ridiculous rules for yourself that you end up breaking. And it was a slow crawl. It took about 2 years before I realized, I have a problem. At that point, I was in Austin and attending a different university, and the double life had just become too much to keep secret anymore. My attitude was changing. I was beginning to turn on the people closest to me, becoming irritable, asking for money. All the behaviors that you associate with junkies were starting to come out in me, and I could no longer keep that facade up. I always tell people that really, if there was any good years of using, it was those first 2. They weren't good, but it wasn't as bad as it got. And I was an addict for 10 years. So 2 out of 10 years were manageable, at least in my mind. After that, it was just a struggle. On and off maintenance drugs like Suboxone, treatment centers, institutions like psychiatric hospitals, support groups. So from that point on, around the time I was 20 years old till I was 29, almost 30, I knew I was addicted. I wanted to quit, but I just couldn't. And I feel like that's when the border's crossed for an addict. When you wake up and you want more than anything to stop doing what you're doing, but you just can't. And that's the nightmare of addiction. I was using everything. You know, heroin and opiates were my drug of choice. They're what I would immediately seek out. But I found this drug culture in where, you know, something was always available. If I couldn't get the heroin, well, I'd make do with what came along. If it was crack, I'd smoke the crack. If it was meth, I would take the meth. And that was just normal to me. That became normal.
Would you do it in the daytime when you know, the double life was I'm doing school, I'm working, and then I seek drugs at night at the beginning? But how did that mesh? Like when you're waking up after it, can you still go to school? Can you still function? How do you function?
It took more and more drugs to be able to function. Had you seen me at the time walking into class, you wouldn't guess that I'd just done $150 worth of hard drugs, because that's what it took to look normal.
Wow.
It would, and then, you know, I mean, at that point, that's an expensive habit.
Where are you getting the money from?
So on one, I had this school card where we had, I forget what it was called, but it had a special name for like the student currency, and you could use it at, say, like a CVS nearby. So I would go and max out the card buying the most expensive items at that CVS, only to go across town and return them at another CVS.
I see.
Little tricks like that. And then I did what almost every addict does to support themselves. I started dealing drugs. You know, I feel like the criminal justice system makes this big distinction between a user and a dealer. You know, they might be more lenient towards a user because, well, he's an addict and we can understand that. But a dealer, they're the ones who are putting this on the streets.
Right.
But so many of the dealers are also users, and that's why they've turned to that option. It's a fast and easy way to make money, and you've got drugs coming in, which,
right.
Unfortunately, that opens up all its own problems because it takes discipline to not get high on your own supply. And so invariably I would go over, you know, cutting into my own profits. And so the whole dealing thing didn't work out. I ended up owing money to scary people, was, you know, living a life where I was always afraid that I was going to get arrested or I was going to get hurt by people I owed money to, and still trying to keep up the facade of being a student. Though at this point, you know, I'd started intravenously using drugs, my grades were dropping, my health was very affected by it, but people still, you know, in my family, the straight people in my life, couldn't put their finger on it. You know, the kid goes off to college, it's almost expected that they'll party a little hard, you know? So I'm sure people thought, oh, he's probably drinking a lot, he's probably going out every night.
Right.
But they didn't have a clue as to the extent of how bad it was. It was a double life that I'm amazed how far I took it. You know, I was maybe 23 years old when I finally came forward to my family and asked to, you know, be put on Suboxone. And I'd heard about that through other friends who were using, and that began a period in my life where
What is that? What is
so Suboxone it's kind of like methadone. It's a drug that blocks the opiate receptors and kind of satisfies that need. So your withdrawals stop, your body kind of evens out, and it acts as a shield so you can't get high on top of it.
Oh, wow.
So if you were to take more heroin, you already took your Suboxone, you don't feel the effect.
Wow.
Or it lessens the effect very, very much.
Well, it seems like that would do it if your mind is right.
It was really, I mean, for 4 years, I stayed clean. But the problem was that the Suboxone, sure, it fixed that problem, but it didn't change my addict behavior. I was still using other drugs. I was still using other drugs daily.
Like what?
Marijuana every day. I personally don't see
So the
that.
Suboxone only works for heroin?
Only for heroin and other opiates. And a little bit for alcohol, because alcohol works on the same receptors. So someone on Suboxone might notice that whereas a couple drinks would usually maybe give them a buzz, they're not feeling that buzz anymore because the Suboxone is blocking that out. But this is a time when I started using more like speed, uppers, cocaine, because the Suboxone didn't block that. And those weren't even drugs that I'd previously enjoyed. So that's another sign of addiction worsening. You know, now you're using stuff that you don't even like just to feel something different, just to get that rush because you're
Now,
used to it.
psychologically, why are you doing this? I mean, do you do a self-assessment, self-reflection, and say, why am I doing this?
Yes. You know, I feel where the point where I am now, responsibility is important for me to take. You know, these were decisions that I made but I also analyze why I made the decisions. And I came from a family where I was an only child. There was a certain loneliness growing up. Sure. The move to Mexico City, although I love Mexico and my Mexican heritage and the culture is very important to me, it was a difficult move for a young boy. I was 12 when I first moved to Mexico from California, and I found a culture that was not okay with me being half and half. Looking outwardly.
Yeah, you don't look like you have any Hispanic in you at all.
And I think that was difficult. So there was a certain, there was bullying that went very far. In the United States, bullying's treated very, very seriously. In Mexico at that time, the late 90s, you might get called into the principal's office, the bully might be reprimanded, but it would just kind of continue. The school that I was going to as well was an all-boys Catholic school, which was a radical difference from the public Californian high school, not high school, but elementary school where I had been previously. So, now I was in middle school, and it was all these boys, very
Now, are
Catholic.
classes in Spanish?
Yeah, the classes were all in Spanish.
Were you bilingual?
I was bilingual, but I spoke with an accent, which was another reason that I felt, just another reason to feel kind of the odd man out. And everything from like the music I listened to kind of the books I read sort of made me an outsider amongst my peers. And it was a violent, there was real abuse that went on there.
I believe it.
Physical punishment to the students was tolerated. Teachers were not above hitting you, over the head. The worst of it was if you really messed up, you would go out and grab this chain link fence. We had these little white uniforms, and traffic in Mexico City is just like, it's constant all day long. The air and the pollution is really, really bad. And so the punishment consisted of holding on to that chain link fence until our little white uniforms had turned gray from the pollution. And then we could come back inside. And at that point, we were nauseous. I would throw up, and I kept getting into trouble because I had that rebel streak, and when the bullies, picked on me, I would fight back. So I was coming home with black eyes. It took a while before I finally managed to get out of that school. My parents finally pulled me out, and I went to the American high school in Mexico City. And that school is more international. There was kids from all over the place. It was still mostly Spanish classes, but they had a separate program for American students. So the sons and daughters of, say, American military who were posted there, or American law enforcement that were working in Mexico, they would go to the American school. And that became an environment where I finally felt like I fit in, because there was all kinds of kids there from all kinds of different backgrounds. But the kids I connected with were the kind of like rock and roll kids who used drugs. And after going through what I'd just been through, finding a group that accepted me, that was really seductive. And those people are still my friends to this day. Most of them used drugs for those years and then kind of stopped,
And that's the Mexico City.
That's the Mexico City
high school, middle school years.
And I went there until just before coming to Texas. And those were some great years. It felt like the party never stopped. I was finally around people that I considered interesting and artistic, and there was beautiful girls, and it was just like a wonderful time. But even looking back then, I noticed that I used drugs and drank differently than they did. They loved it. They loved to have a good time, but I would take it too far. Now, I'd be the one who did it till he got sick, or I'd be the one who did it till he blacked out. And like I said, most of them, they kind of moved on with their lives. Not everyone who uses drugs, even hard drugs, becomes an addict. I think that's the big mystery about addiction, is why do some people become addicts and other people seem to just kind of grow up and get past it? And that's a question that I think is yet to be really answered.
I agree with you. I know people, I'm 60, and I know people my age or older who's always messed with drugs. I mean, doctors, lawyers, who've always done hard drugs too, like cocaine and things recreationally.
And they manage.
They manage it. They manage. They can do everything. I know a few. like that.
I certainly do too, and that's a.
It's weird.
It's weird because
it is weird.
Maybe it's a genetic thing that some people have this. It just. I think that there might be answers in that department, the scientific answers to why some people are addicts and others aren't. But I think the real answers are psychological, and
I do too.
That's a trickier thing to navigate, and that's why the Suboxone was only so helpful. It was very helpful, but it could only help my brain. It couldn't help my mind. if that makes sense. It couldn't help me change my thoughts. That was something I had to do on my own. So for 4 years, I was free from heroin, but I eventually found a way to cheat the Suboxone, found that I could kind of get off it for a couple days, and that was long enough to feel high again. And so I was going back and forth between the two, and that just made me more dependent than ever. And the one thing that had been my shield, suddenly became a weapon I was using against myself.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That is a lot.
It was, and I still advocate for Suboxone. I think if you're someone struggling with addiction to opiates, it's definitely an option. I don't think that it should be the only option. I think you should seek support groups, seek therapy. You should be doing a number of things, not just the Suboxone. That was my mistake. I thought, and that was the attitude I had. Like, I'll just take this whatever, and that'll fix me. It wasn't until I really got into support groups like Alcoholics Anonymous that I realized that there's all kinds of other stuff that I'm going to need to do to get better and stay better. And like I said, that took 10 years of trying before I figured that out.
Wow. So what are your tools to stop the triggers that make you might want to go back and have that feeling again, that high feeling?
It's a good friend of mine from Alcoholics Anonymous always said that, addiction's a disease of loneliness and the cure is in human relationships.
Wow.
And that's
pretty prophetic.
Oh, it was beautiful. And it's so true, but you got to pick the right relationship.
Right.
I realized getting sober that a lot of the people around me, I didn't even like them. They weren't people that I would ever hang out with under any other situation. And the people I'd really cared about had gotten so far away from me because, they just got tired of trying to help and seeing me mess up. And they got tired of watching me destroy myself and getting hit up for money or getting, having their stuff turn up missing, And I understand that because I've been in the position where I've both been an addict and I've loved and cared about people who are still addicts and still using. So I know it from both sides. I know how frustrating it is to, care about someone and you just want to shake them to think, snap out of it. But I know how hard it is. I lost someone who was very close to me this last year, and he was someone who was still going to meetings, down to 2 days before he died. So you can.
Was his death related to drugs?
Yes, he died. Unfortunately, passed away due to drugs, and.
So going to the meetings, what was his struggle? He's going to meetings, but yet he's still using, or he's seesawing. What is he doing?
He was going to meetings and still using, and
just trying to find the strength.
Exactly, and a lot of the the beauty of the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and that's not something that I do as much anymore, but I still talk highly of AA. I've got my problems with it, but there's a lot of good in it, and the good is that you can be there no matter what. You can show up drunk, and if you're not going to interrupt the meeting, if you just want to be there because you need a place to be, you're going to find people who are welcoming, and they're ready to have you there.
And that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. They're going to tell you to keep coming back. They're going to, because they've been there too, I know guys with 20 years of sobriety that, came to their first meeting drunk.
Wow.
So it's so important to have a place you can go to, and there are lots of AA meetings. There's hundreds, maybe even thousands, just in the Houston area.
Right.
And that's a big thing. I mean, I feel like it's especially difficult for people to get clean in rural areas. Maybe there's not a meeting immediately around, or maybe there's only one meeting, and it's difficult for them to make it there. And that's treatment needs to be more available. Number one, no matter what side of the equation you fall on, I think at this point it's an epidemic. And
let me ask you this: you're a writer, you're an editor. You said your daddy was an American journalist, so it was kind of in your bones.
Yeah.
What were you doing with your artistic side during your addiction for all those years? How were you satisfying that?
I actually never stopped writing, but I was such a mess. I remember one point in 2012, I had submitted a story, and I was submitting and writing less, but I was still writing. I submitted a story that I thought, oh, this is really good. I submitted it to a magazine out in Austin, And the magazine had actually been trying to get a hold of me to tell me, hey, we accepted your story. We'd like to pay you for it. But I was such a mess. I didn't check my email. I didn't keep up on things like that. And so I was so depressed that they hadn't taken the story, and I was just negative self-talking, like, oh, I'm a loser, and getting all messed up over it. And the whole time they'd accepted the story.
Oh my God, it's just crazy.
So it was really difficult to get back to writing without drugs and alcohol, because it is a scary, vulnerable thing. If you write something and it doesn't go so well and you get some criticism, you've got to be solid to take that criticism. Exactly. And at the time, I was, a deeply insecure drug addict who maybe couldn't handle criticism or take responsibility for even the simplest of things. So I think that was the toughest thing, is taking the first step sober into writing again. And there's this myth amongst a lot of artists that, the drugs were part of what made me creative.
Right.
I used to tell myself that.
Right. I've heard that.
I need these drugs because they make me look at the world in this special, different way. And that's a myth. And if you can't write without the drugs, then you probably couldn't write at all to begin with. And a lot of the writers that I admired had used drugs and drank, and so I was kind of emulating them. But it wasn't until later that I realized that they didn't write or drink drunk. They got drunk a lot. They did a lot of drugs. They got
drunk. They got high.
But when they were writing, they were writing. They might have been hungover. They might have been tired, but that was the writing time. Their discipline was or else we would never know who they were.
Right. It was the discipline. And those friends that we have and associates that can still drink and get high and still work and be productive, I was going to say that earlier, they're very disciplined.
Yeah.
I mean, the ones I know are very disciplined. And I think discipline's the key.
Absolutely. And I lacked that completely. It's still something that I work on, It was hard enough getting sober, but then I realized, wow, I lack discipline in all these other areas of my life.
So how did you get sober? How'd you do it?
Well, I first went to, my father was a huge help for me during this. When I finally caught my charge in Montgomery County, is January. No, it was December. So this was 5 years ago. It was December 14th, 5 years ago. It was my father.
December 14th. Mm-hmm. So that would be 2013?
No, it was 2014.
14. Okay.
And my father was the one who called the police that day. I'd been up for 10 days. Sleep deprived, completely full of drugs, and in that kind of, it's almost like you see the stereotype of paranoid junkies. I didn't see my father or my girlfriend or people around me who were my friends and family. I saw threats. I thought everyone's out to get me, and I was so convinced. I couldn't see reality for what it was, and a lot of it's hazy, but I still remember that feeling of just terror. I was scared for my life. I'd had of
the people you love.
Yes, of any people, but especially them. I just didn't see them for who they were. I was nuts. I was crazy. At this point, I'd recently come out of doing a month at Houston, Harris County Psychiatric Center, because I jumped out of my second-story window of my apartment on West Alabama because I was convinced that these cartel drug lords were there to kill me. They were not really. There was no one there. But I was so convinced that I jumped, 20 feet onto a sidewalk.
Oh my God! What happened to you?
That luckily there was a bush. I got pretty scratched up, but if that bush hadn't have been there,
the burning bush wasn't burning. It was catching. It was a
catching bush.
You had a catching bush. Oh my God! You have had some chances, haven't you, Christopher?
I really have, and
wow, a 20-story. 20 feet.
20 feet, 15, 20 feet. It was. I pass it often because it's right down the street from where some friends live and some events I like to go to. So I always pass and think, my God, that's a way longer drop than it felt like at the time. I literally ran to a cop car that night because I was so sure that I was being pursued that I was like, help me, and the police took it seriously.
So after you jumped out, you could still run?
Yeah.
You didn't break anything?
No, I had scratches all over my face, but I didn't break. I didn't even twist my ankle. And I think part of it was also just the amount of drugs in my body, that I probably could have been.
Feel it.
I could have been hit by a truck and I would have gotten back up at that point.
Wow.
So, those breaks from reality were really associated with crystal meth.
Wow.
That's, a person on crystal meth can be a very dangerous thing,
Wow.
They can become violent, they can, snap or become convinced of something totally crazy, but in their head, they're acting on it like it's reality. That was really the worst of it for me. And I'm so grateful that, you know, my father took that step. As a father, that must have been the hardest thing in the world to, you know, say, all right, I'm calling the police on my own son. You know, I can't imagine what that was like for him, but it was the greatest thing anyone's ever done for me.
Now, what was the charge? Aggravated assault?
It was aggravated assault. You know,
Did you have a deadly weapon?
I had a pair of scissors that I'd been scrapbooking with. I mean, I was just cutting up magazines like a crazy person, arranging all the pictures around me. And, you know, I became convinced that they wanted to kill me or attack me. I don't know. I mean, I don't know clearly what I thought, but I felt threatened and just exploded. You know, at that point, I think that if I hadn't gone to jail, I would have certainly died. You know, I was just skin and bones. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. I was probably malnourished. You know, all the precautions I'd taken before, like, you know, even using clean needles, I wasn't, you know, even taking those precautions anymore. I was running with pretty bad people, and you know, I was knocking on death's door. I think at that point I wouldn't have cared if I lived or died. I was just so completely out of control. And I'd been fighting it for so long unsuccessfully that I just thought, there's no way. You know, so I did 4 months, and I detoxed in a jail tank.
Wow.
It was.
Did they help you or had to do it naturally?
There's no help in there. I mean, they wouldn't even give you an Advil. In fact, I was lucky that someone told me coming into it. They said, don't tell them you're detoxing. And I didn't have the strength.
Now, why weren't you supposed to tell them?
If you tell them you're detoxing, at least in Montgomery County, they'll just move you to the detox tank, which is more for their protection than yours. If you're detoxing, then you're a liability. They'll keep an eye on you so as to, you know, they don't want you to die on them, but you're not going to receive any special treatment.
I see.
And the holding tanks are so cold already that being in a tank with nobody is just like being in an ice box. So I just kept my mouth shut, and really I made it through holding long enough to get to a bed, because the withdrawals take, I mean, it's about 24 hours before they're really out of control terrible. At that point, I just, you know, shivered on a cot with one thin blanket, and it's hard for me to remember all that. I think my brain suppressed it because it was
so painful.
It was so painful.
Do you throw up like they show you on TV?
Yeah.
Is that your body starts just
shivering, vomiting, abdominal pain? At that point, a lot of psychological stuff too. You know, it was because I wasn't just coming off of the heroin at that point, or the Suboxone, which I'd been back and forth on. It was, you know, a pretty hefty speed habit as well. It was Xanax, and it was alcohol. I mean, I was really addicted to a lot of different substances.
Wow.
And you know, in that environment, though, I was lucky. Of all the tanks I could have ended up in that jail, I was surrounded with some really understanding men.
Wow.
And they, you know, rather than be angry, I was afraid at first, like, I'm keeping people up, throwing up, I'm making all this noise. But they were, you know, kind. They would bring me warm coffee to my bed, and they were like talking me through it, like, you're gonna feel better, you know, in a few days. And at that point, there wasn't a choice. You know, I couldn't go get the drugs because I couldn't leave the tank. And I think at that point, nothing else would have done it. You know.
You had to go cold turkey.
I had to go cold turkey. And I used to argue against cold turkey and say, oh no, you shouldn't do cold turkey. It can be dangerous. And it can be, you know, it can be. People have died trying to come off of, especially, you know, benzos like Xanax and alcohol. You could have a seizure that could be fatal. So there was that danger for me, but I was lucky. It took about a month for me to be able to kind of get up and move around the tank, feel normal, you know.
Could you eat during that month?
Oof, I did not eat much. I didn't eat much. But again, it was the guys who were in there saying, you gotta eat. Like, we know you don't want to, but just get it in your mouth, and your body needs, you gotta help your body along a little bit. And, you know, the irony of it was that I started, you know, I was in there 4 months, I'd say around month 2 or 3, I started to feel happy and freer than I had been in years, even though I was in this little concrete box. You know, obviously I wanted to get out, and I wanted to, you know, get on with my life, but I even had a little fear over being released, because I was thinking, God, you know, I don't want to get out of here and start it all over again, not after what I've just been through. So we worked with, you know, I presented to the courts the idea of maybe going straight to treatment, and I went to Memorial Hermann's Prevention and Recovery Center down on Gessner, and met like the kindest, most understanding people there. You know, I remain close with a lot. Like my first roommate in that rehab is a close friend of mine now, and he's doing great. A lot of those people that I met in rehab, a lot of them didn't make it. You know, something that was told to me in those meetings that I thought they were just trying to make it sound really scary. They said, hey, if you're going to be in recovery, you're going to go to a lot of funerals, so make sure you have a nice black suit. And I thought, oh, they're just trying to scare us. But man, they were. I've never been to so many funerals since I got sober. You know, I went to maybe 3 or 4 this last year, and there was a couple more I couldn't make it to. And you know, that's a sad thing, but I try to remember at every time it happens, you know, this kind of, you know, keep my humility about me and remember that I'm just a bad choice or two away from that being me, you know. And it's a difficult thing, but there was a, you know, a kind of brotherhood and a sense of belonging that I'd been looking for since I was that lonely kid in Mexico that I found in being a recovered drug addict. You know, no one will understand you like someone else that's gone through it. And I care for, you know, I have a care for inmates and drug addicts. I feel like they're my people. You know, whatever your circumstances were, if you were a drug addict and you're struggling with that, you know, I feel like a certain kinship there. And so that's what I've channeled my writing efforts into since then. And, you know, what I really would like to do with my life is continue writing about that experience truthfully, because there's a lot of BS that surrounds it, you know. And with the criminal justice system, we see a lot of shows like, you know, 60 Days In or whatever, like reality shows about prison. I haven't seen it either. I've heard of it. You know, it's where they like put a person into county jail and they see how long they can last. You know, they're pretending that they're an inmate in the jail environment. And that just seems like kind of sick and stupid, you know, but because the reality of what people are going through in there, you know, they're not all innocent. A lot of us, we did things that we deserve to go to jail over. But if there's addiction as a root cause, then I feel like that's someone who needs help, and treatment is available. It just needs to be more available, and the myths surrounding drug addiction need to be dispelled. And as long as people are presenting addiction insincerely in the media, you know, kids are going to keep romanticizing it, you know, because I did. I thought, you know, drugs were rock and roll and parties and having a good time, and, you know, that's what sent me off looking for it. And, you know, yeah, sure, it is a good time. Like I said, those first 2 years out of 10 were great, but that's not a good deal. It's
not a good deal.
8 years of hell for 2 pretty good ones, that was not a good deal.
No, that was not a good deal. So how long did you have to stay in Memorial Hermann, the treatment facility?
I was there for a month, but I met a man named Jim Phelps who owned sober living homes around Houston, and he got me a bed at a house in Sharpstown, sober living community of men, and that was a formative experience. Because at that point, it's, you know, you've gotten the treatment, your body's back to normal, but that's where a lot of people relapse. So rather than make the mistake I'd always made, you know, go back to trying to just live normal, go back to the same environment without having adjusted things in my life, I thought, I'm going to give this the time it needs. And so I stayed there over 6 months. And it was...
Now, is that something that you have to pay for, or is that something that's...
There are open... I know there's a 24-hour group here in Houston, and I believe that's a free, if not free, like very affordable. And 24-hour group, you can just come in, and if you're someone who needs help, they'll be there for you.
Now, is a sober living community or house the same as a safe house?
Very similar, or like a halfway house.
Okay.
Very similar to like a transitional facility, say for someone leaving prison.
Yeah, because there's one across the street from my old office off of Alabama, and the people pay themselves, so it's not government funded.
Yes.
But they have about 14 people there.
That's how mine was.
I think they call it a safe house, and if they do drugs, they put them out.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was like. Now, if you did get kicked out for using drugs, that didn't mean you were out forever. Like, it might be a week, it might be something. You know, I remember there were cases where someone got kicked out, and they said, all right, you know, come back and be able to pass a drug test in a week, show us that you want this, and it would be possible to get back in. But
is AA in these living facilities, or do you still have to go to a meeting outside of that house or that community?
Both. In our house, we'd have house meetings, which were you know, once a week, just for the house members. But we were required to do at least one meeting a day. when I screwed up and I was caught sleeping in past the time I was supposed to be there, the house manager told me in no uncertain terms, you better be at this 5 o'clock in the morning meeting every day or you're out. So I had to get up at 4, brush my teeth, jump on a bus to make it to a meeting, and that was a great thing for me too. You know, it was like they were saying, we know you lack discipline, but we're gonna force it on you, whether you like it or not. And then you start getting a sense of self-worth, like, oh, I can actually do this, and if I can do this, what else can I do? And it was little by little. I mean, it was like building a sandcastle, 1 grain of sand at a time, but you know, by the end of those 6 months, I was a very different person than I.
So where could you go after that? After the 6 months, could you go back home, or I mean, where did you go?
I decided to go back home because at that point I was starting a drug court program. So really, it was, you know, I went from one level to another of treatment. From, you know, if you want to consider.
Now, was that a drug
treatment.
Court
in Montgomery County?
Montgomery, okay.
And I was lucky to get into that. And you know, it's those kind of programs I think are making a big difference. You know, whereas we used to just lock people up, we're treating it as not only a health issue or a social issue. More therapeutic. And hey, the drug court program, if you mess up there too, you're going back to jail. I mean, it could even be an infraction that wasn't, you know, necessarily using again could end you back in jail. So they're also realized that it's a holistic issue. It's like a whole body. You know, it's your mind, it's your behavior, it's your attitudes. Because if you get in trouble for drugs and you're an addict and you get out of jail, you go back to the same neighborhood around the same people. All you did was spend a couple months in jail. What's going to keep you from going back to the same thing? There's not been any change. It's unfair to expect someone to have changed that much just over the punishment. Because if negative results were enough to keep people clean, man, I would have been clean a long time before. I had plenty of negative, you know, repercussions because of my drug use, but that wasn't enough. You know, I think you have to get a glimmer of hope. That's when you can see a new life for yourself and sort of have that promise come true, even if it's little by little. That's why I'm sober today. What keeps me sober are the good things in my life, and you know, the idea that there's something bigger than myself that I want to do. That had never been there before.
Oh, that's a beautiful thing. I want to ask you this. A lot of ex-addicts that I know, they smoke. Some can still even do alcohol.
Yeah.
What can you do?
So I'm actually trying to quit smoking cigarettes.
Because most addicts I know, ex-addicts that have recovered, smoke.
It's.
And, I mean, smoking, can kill you, but not the same. And you know, for that addictive personality, you usually have to do something. And I know a lot of the people I know who are my age, who, you know, kicked the habit 20 years ago, whatever, they still smoke and they drink a lot of coffee. That's what I notice a lot of.
I drink a lot of coffee. I drink a lot of coffee. It's kind of like an alcohol substitute, especially if I'm in an environment where there are people drinking around me, which, you know, I didn't do for maybe the first 2 years. I avoided bars, barbecues, situations like that. But I think it's important to, you know, not fear something like that. You know, when you get back in that situation, you realize that, oh, I can be around other people having a drink and not have a drink. They're not thinking about whether I'm drinking or not.
Right.
You know, you think like, oh, it'll be weird that I'm not drinking. They don't care.
They don't care. They're drinking.
They're drinking, exactly. So I just have like a Red Bull or a coffee, and that's my alcohol substitute. And, you know, I would say that I probably do it to excess, but it's way better than what I was doing to excess before.
And at your meetings, don't they serve coffee?
Oh, yes.
That's what y'all do. That's where you get hooked on that coffee.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. It was AA coffee. I love it. It's maybe not the best coffee in the world, but it's got a special place in my heart.
Oh, that's good. So, wow, that's a great story of addiction and overcoming it. So how long, the big question is, how long have you been sober?
So all in all, I've been clean and sober 5 years. But what I will point out is early on, I used this kind of now controversial herbal substance called kratom. And for a lot of recovering opiate addicts, kratom was like a really great herbal option.
Now spell that?
Kratom. It's been in the news a lot.
T-O-M as in man?
T-O-M, like Tom.
Okay.
And it's under big time review by the FDA right now. I think there's a Netflix documentary about it.
So it's man-made.
No, it's a plant from Indonesia, and the leaves are crushed down and like a green powder, and people either take them in capsules or brew a tea, and it just has like a kind of light effect on the opiate receptors without being, you know, a derivative of the poppy plant. So that like really helped me with cravings, helped me sleep, helped me get past those first few months of, you know, what they call post-acute withdrawal. Once you get past the physical part, there's this whole psychological part where you're restless and you're irritable and anxious, and that's where a lot of people go back. So I'd say that kratom was good for me during that time, but I didn't realize how controversial of a substance it was and ended up getting in trouble for it in my drug court. A lot of people did.
Why? Does it test?
There is actually a kratom test now, which was, believe me, a surprise.
Were you in drug court? It was there?
Yes. And
is it illegal?
It's not illegal, but it's under review. So the DEA...
But in drug court, would you know you can't use it? Or
I looking back on it now, I probably should have known better. But at the time, I thought, well, you know, this is a legal herbal substance. But as this has really been an issue that's been heating up, the DEA tried to make it illegal about a year and a half ago, and that was overturned. You know, so there's some scientists that say, hey, this could be a really powerful tool in the fight against the opiate crisis. Other groups say, no, this is just compounding the problem or making it worse. And you know, I honestly don't know where I fall on that anymore. I used to be a big-time advocate for kratom, and like I said, it did help me at first. It wasn't like an intoxicating substance. I didn't feel like it was getting me high or anything, but I do think it was still a crutch. I was still looking for something outside of myself to help me through this. You know, I wasn't fully committed, and I've come to the point now where I think that maybe the only way to really get off drugs is just to not use anything at all. I mean, maybe coffee's okay.
Maybe cigarettes.
And some cigarettes, though I really am trying to quit. But the kratom issue it's frightening because it's more than anything, it's not FDA regulated, so you're not quite sure what you're getting. They've recently found like traces of heavy metals in some, so you know there could be something toxic in there. You just don't know what you're getting, and it's probably best to avoid something that's unregulated, is the conclusion I've come to. But at the same time, it was a help early on. Outside of that, though, it's been 5 years without alcohol or drugs.
Wow! Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you. I never thought I'd say that out loud.
Do you keep up with the anniversary date?
Yes, the date of my arrest, as I said, was it was January 14th. I'm sorry, not December.
January. Okay,
January 14th.
That's why you thought. That's why you're saying 5 years.
Yeah,
we're at January.
Exactly. We're coming up close
on 19.
It.
Yeah. I got you.
Or actually, to be precise, December 14th was when the initial police were called, but I went to Tri-County from there and thought that that was the end of it. Tri-County is another psychiatric ward, and I thought that was the end of it. Got out, kept using. Then it was in January, early in January, maybe January 5th or 6th, something like that. It was early in January that they came back to me and told me I was under arrest for what had happened back in December. But I guess it just took a while. So it wasn't initially my father's call that got me. It was about a month later that I went to jail, but I still think that it was that call that saved my life. I didn't see it that way at first.
I know you didn't. I know you didn't. I know you were really mad at him. But it's so good that y'all have made up for it. Did you have to have a come to Jesus meeting with your father? Like, Father, I'm sorry I put you through all of this?
Yeah, definitely. And he's my best friend and my hero. You know, my dad's the person who instilled the love of writing and film into my life. We love watching movies together, and he's someone who never really messed with drugs or alcohol. So it took a lot for him to try and understand where I was coming from, because in his experience, I don't think he would never want to try the things that I tried, and I think it was hard for him to understand why I did. I mean, and addicts in a lot of ways were mysteries to ourselves. I mean, I don't know why I did half the stuff I did. I know that it was coming from some kind of deep place that's like mysterious to me. You know, it was propelling me to go further and further down this destructive road. But he was there, you know, every weekend in jail. He'd come
Wow.
to visitation. He was there for the family meetings at the rehab. My mother flew back from Mexico as well. You know, so I had a lot of support from both of my parents, and that's a big thing. You need a support group. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be family, but that's what these meetings really provide, is a support group. It's something you can't go out alone. So, you know, when my friend Russell Curtis, who actually passed away recently, and he was a great hero in my recovery and in my life, and I met him at Alcoholics Anonymous meetings in Bel Air, and he would say, you know, it's a disease of loneliness and the cure is human relationships.
That's so powerful.
It
Disease of loneliness. I got to write that down. Keep talking.
Yeah, you know, it's a slow and steady process getting sober. I think that addicts are really used to immediate change. You know, we look at a pill bottle, we know I take this, in 45 minutes I'll feel different. So to be told that you will feel different, you'll feel better than you ever imagined you could feel, but it might take 2 years. That's hard for an addict to swallow. You're thinking, I can't wait 2 minutes feeling the way I'm feeling. You're telling me to wait 2 years? So that is tough. But the truth is, you will feel better than you ever thought was possible if you can make it.
If you can make it that way. Well, tell me how your male-female relationships are going on through all this addiction. Were you dating women who were addicted? Did you not care about women at the time? I know you have a girlfriend, so I know you like women.
The unspoken rule, and this is a rule that I actually have a problem with, but in AA they tell you to avoid relationships the first year. There's probably a lot of good reason for that, you know.
Because the disappointment in the relationship might trigger another binge.
For a lot of people, their addictions are tied up in codependent relationships, and I know mine were. You know, it was always me and, you know, my female partner who had the same drug problems as me, and we were like a little group, you know, and we would keep each other bad when one was trying to get good, you know, because misery loves company. And I did that for years with a number of, you know, young ladies who, many of them are doing better now. A few are dead, you know, a few didn't make it. And that's a difficult thing, to lose someone you've been intimate with, you know, and to get better when others that you care about didn't. There's a certain survivor's guilt. That's something that I struggle with, not just with you know, like ex-girlfriends that have passed, but with friends that have passed. It's hard to hear that a buddy died and you think, well, why, you know, he was a good person, why did I make it and he didn't? These are big questions. The same question as to why someone is an addict. Why do some addicts get better and others don't? Because I've seen guys that were enthusiastic about it, men and women who wanted nothing more than to get better, and they couldn't. And I don't know why that is, you know, because I know that they were just as willing as I was, and they had just as much at stake. So those are big questions, and the questions that drive a lot of the work I do now. Let's
talk about that work.
Oh, sure.
We got about 10 minutes, so let's talk about that work. Tell me about your work.
Well, I had the chance just before I graduated the University of Houston downtown, I got involved with their literary magazine. And I met Ray Hill through my father, the late Ray Hill. I think we're all reeling from the news of his death.
Yes, we are. We're all suffering.
Yeah.
Ray, I love you. I love you, Ray Hill. Wherever you are, I know you're laughing at us, ready to tell us more stories.
When I met him, he told me that he'd come out of the closet 2 times, once as a gay man and once as a convict. Then he turned these things that society would have used against him into something that made him strong. That stuck with me, man. And I, you know,
he was a powerful man.
He was a powerful man. He told me that, and I thought, well, you know, rather than keep this all quiet, because I was uncomfortable. I would have never come on this show before he told me that. You know, I kept these things secret. But I realized that, you know, I can use these things and be honest about my past. Maybe it could help someone else.
Of course, that's why we do it. Yes.
And it became the focus of my writing. You know, with the Bayou Review magazine was UHD's literary magazine. The general editor, Michelle Howard, and myself, and our teacher, our professor advisor, Daniel Pena, who's an excellent novelist and my writing mentor, we made an issue that was focused on inmate writing. I went on to the prison show and we called for submissions. The submissions came pouring in, and I think we put together a really special issue of men who, many of them are serving life sentences. Some for some pretty, we were careful to not look up their crimes, but in the correspondence, you know, I did come across, and there were some serious crimes in there, but we really wanted to just give a voice to the voiceless and show this world that is really out of sight, out of mind. That's my fear with the mass incarceration and the prison system, is that people don't really, you know, they think of it, they know that there are prisons out there, but it's like this whole world they can't imagine. You can't imagine it until you're in it. But for the guards and the prisoners who live there all the time, it's a world that also produces art, you know, because they're human beings in there, and human beings in a difficult situation. I think that's where the greatest art comes from. So we're continuing that. Now that Michelle and I have both graduated, we're continuing it with a new magazine we have planned called The Texas Reformer, and we're working with another one of our co-editors, Joseph Clark, who, you know, did I believe 8 years, a lot of that in solitary. And he's now, you know, a very dedicated student. I wanted him to be here tonight. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it. And he's working on a book called From the Inside Out, based on his experiences. So, you know, Michelle, she's someone who's compassionate for the issue, but she's never had drug problems or problems with the criminal justice system. But she's just got a really big heart and a good mind and an excellent editor. But I think Joseph and I have been working well on this because we have that past experience. Him even more than me. I mean, 8 years is a long time. And solitary is... Whew. You know, he came out of it stronger, and he's like an A student now, and he's, you know, just looking ahead. So we're hoping to put together an issue. On this one, we'd like women to send in as well. And that's tough because, you know, the prison show, it only reaches certain in-range prison farms and units. And so we didn't get any submissions from women, and we didn't get the art submissions that we were hoping for.
The women are in Dayton, right?
Yeah. So I think that on a good night, maybe we might reach them, but it depends on like weather, and, you know, they might not have might not have heard. But we're experimenting with different strategies to get the word out to other prisons, and, you know, really, you know, have it more diverse content on this one.
Right.
I'd like anything from you know, lawyers talking about the appeals process, or family members discussing, you know, the difficulties of visitation. I know that I've spoken to a lot of family members who talk about, you know, their loved one being transferred. Texas is a big state, you know, they might end up in a prison farm 12 hours away, and that's really, really tough on the families. And before Ray Hill fought to get telephones in prisons, you know, there wasn't even that option. So you could just go to prison. It was like disappearing from the world.
Wow. Wow. Ray was a big man.
Oh, yeah.
He did some big things.
You know, but I really think he inspired so many people to keep up the good fight, that he's alive and with us in a very palpable way. And
absolutely, a powerful way. Just KPFT. So tell me what you do with the prison show and KPFT. How do you volunteer?
I every chance I get, any Friday that I'm around, I go down and help them run the Facebook live stream. So, you know, if you join the prison show Facebook, you can see it live, or you can see the videos uploaded after the fact. So I know that there's a lot of viewers and listeners to the prison show, some of which might not be able to tune in and watch at the exact time. So it's great for them to have those videos to go look up later and still be able to catch the show. So basically, I hold up a little iPad on a tripod and move it from speaker to speaker and try to capture the show as it's going on when I'm down there. David and I have been, you know, we're not the most technical people in the world, but we would love to be able to do like a camera switch, kind of like, nothing like this setup, but even just like with little cell phones, there's an app called Switcher Studio, so we could link the cell phones together and kind of get different angles. So we're hoping to make it flashier as time goes on, but neither David Collingsworth, the producer, and I, we're not the most technical people. So.
It sounds like you're learning, though, talking about switching. It sounds like you do know what's going on and what you're doing. Well, I'm just really proud of you. I was glad to see you at the airport. I'm glad you're doing great works. I love the fact that you're a writer, an editor, and recovering addict, and that you're telling people stories. That's what I've done since 2011. I tell stories, people watch it, it's on YouTube, and it also plays at Houston Media Source all the time. But I think that people people are lonely and they feel isolated when they've been in trouble. And they need to know that other people have gone to prison, other people have been addicted, white, black, Hispanic. It could happen to anybody, different socioeconomic groups, big families, small families, only children, but we can still come out of it. That's the blessing, is we can come out of it. We can do important things to rehabilitate ourselves and try to strengthen ourselves and others.
Absolutely.
In the process. And so that's why I'm very, very proud of you.
Thank you.
We have 4 minutes, so we can still talk a little bit more about it. So with the Texas Reform, that's a great name.
Thank you.
That's a really good
You know
name.
that that's one of the things is titles always give me trouble as a writer. Titles, like, oh man, but that one came across. And I thought, okay, well, this is sort of what we're after. We don't want to be overtly political. That's
Right.
something we want to try to avoid. We obviously have our opinions.
Sure. And that's what I do here. I try not to be political because it's the story.
Exactly.
It's the human experience that we want to share. Because I think everybody's so superficial, especially with Facebook and Instagram. It's also fake. We have to have, and the news is fake and everything is fake. We have to have some human elements because you can't get out of addiction faking. You have to be truth. You got to pull all those layers off and get down to your soul and fight for your life.
Absolutely.
And fight to keep your life.
And in the preface that Ray Hill wrote the foreword for our Bayou Review issue, which was such an honor, and he described it as a 3-way relationship between the writer, the inmate writer in this case, a pen and a piece of paper. And with those 3 elements, they are able to move past these walls around them, move past the iron bars and the concrete, in the same way that the prison show circumvents the state, because they will always provide radios to their inmates, because it's kind of, Ray Hill described it as the babysitters of the inmates. So using that as our way in, we've been able to create this. And this is so important for people to see, and it's so important for our inmate authors. A lot of the gratitude that they felt in being published really was moving to me. We got some thank you letters that were, brightly colored. And I know from my time inside that sometimes that's done with Skittles. Sometimes it's like handmade watercolors. I don't know if in TDC they can actually get watercolors, because this was so bright. It was really amazing work.
So everybody that you published, you sent them a copy?
Yes, and we did that through the help of Inside Books Project, which is out of Austin. And they're amazing. They get books into inmates who maybe don't have family members who can send them books directly. They can write to Inside Books Projects, and they will send them literature into the prison system. So through them, we were able to get every contributor a copy themselves, which was really important to us. And it was difficult to do, because you can't just directly send stuff to prison.
Right.
And there's pretty good reasons for that.
Drugs.
You could bring in drugs, or you could put a rate. Even hardcover books are not allowed. And I think when I was in jail, they would rip the hardcover off, because that could be used as a weapon. That's one thing I'll say for the guys in jail. They're ingenious, and that
self-defense is primal. You have to know how to protect yourself,
exactly.
or figure out a way just in case.
Very intelligent guys in there, able to work with basically nothing and make all kinds of stuff out of it.
Can you believe, with no commercials, I'm being told by the director to wrap this up, start wrapping it up.
It was such an honor.
So if you got about 60 seconds, you can try to wrap it up and talk about your future and where we can find you. Obviously on the prison show, people can write you or call in and find you if they need you. Christopher.
You could follow me on my Twitter. If you just look me up with Christopher Miguel Flakus, Flakus. I'm posting a lot of stuff on there as to what we're doing, and I'll be keeping updates on the Texas Reformer.
Well, I can't wait. I know your Bayou Review issues sold out, but if there's ever one laying around, I'd love to read it, even if you can send it to me digitally.
Oh, absolutely. I'll make sure I get you a copy.
VivianRKing@gmail.com. So I'd love to see that, and then when you get the Texas Reformers off the ground, let me know so I can support that and support that endeavor. Well, let me just say this: thank you very much for watching and being a fan of Truth and Justice with Vivian King for the last 7 years. I'm excited that I can bring this to you. I'm excited that Christopher Flakus told his story one more time so we can understand the ins and outs of addiction. Thank you for watching, and good night. And remember, I want to tell your story. Good night. Thank you for tuning in again. something really good, a hot topic in the news this week. He's been charged with a crime. This is a show where I try to educate real stories. Something really good, a hot topic in the news this week. He's been charged with a crime. This is a show where